make sure that I'm giving you all the opportunities to be comfortable enough to tell me exactly. Okay.
They were really.
Okay.
Trust me, I hear that every day when fellows talking to me on the site.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
When she said, "Daddy, no." She said, "No, Daddy." And that's the last thing she said.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. In this episode, I want to debunk a widely held theory, if not a belief, that the Watch children were killed at the well site. There are actually a couple of crazy narratives that are associated with the Watts case, and it seems as the case gets older and colder, the narratives get crazier and more sort of spin off more and more conspiracy theories. Of course, Chris Watts has got a lot to do with this himself, but a lot of the people commentating have also got a lot to do with it, and they certainly have an incentive. There's an incentive to keep the narrative sort of unfolding, and to jump from one soapy to the next and one conspiracy theory to the next, on and on and on, right? That's not what we want to do at True Crime Rocket Science. At True Crime Rocket Science, we want to get to the bottom of it, and we want to get closure. We want to kind of assess the facts, have a theory, and then sort of put a frame around it, and then that's it. In other words, we want to kind of fence off the case and say, okay, this is what happened, right? Part of certainly my involvement in I guess the ongoing aftermath of the case is when you get the other narratives coming through, then one's got to respond to them in order to counter them, and that's really what it is, and that's really what this is going to be as well. So there are others, such as the ongoing fallacy that Kissinger was involved in some way, and then also the latest one, which is that Watts attempted to smother his children. It was like a botched smothering, I guess, but I mean, what makes that contention so crazy, it's actually a failed double attempted murder, I guess, which is, anyway, I'm not going to go into that. So what we're going to deal with here is Bella's last words and how they suggest the Watts children weren't smothered at the well site. Now, when I originally wrote that title, I wrote Bella's last words prove the Watts children weren't smothered at the well site. I think that's a little bit too strong, but it's certainly almost there. And I think once you've listened to this episode, you will be tempted to say that it does prove that. Again, I would like to be more strident, but I think one of the areas where True Crime Rocket Science is a little bit different is where we say this is what the facts point to, and we're very certain of it. Like, we might even be 99% sure, but we can never be 100% sure. And that is kind of the humility that science needs to have. You need to be aware of what you don't know, right? Even if you're pretty convinced of what you do know. So in TWO FACE Annihilation, which is the 7th book in the TWO FACE series, I analyzed and interrogated this notion of Bella's last words in quite a lot of detail. That was actually the headline act of the second confession, and the headline Dr. Phil ran with, Bella's last words. The interesting thing with Dr. Phil is Dr. Phil will analyze things, and then he has his exclusives, and he interviews the victim's family and whatever, and then there's this sort of show where he seems to provide psychological analysis and whatnot. The question is, the question is he providing his analysis kind of in a way that is popular? In other words, he's providing a show that people are going to be interested in, or is he providing kind of a cogent analysis which might not be popular, it might not even be believable, but it's nevertheless anchored in I don't want to say science, but it's anchored in a professional and sort of rigorous examination of all the evidence? Or is it both? Or is it more one or the other? And to illustrate this, one should sort of look at this aspect of Bella in one version from Chris Watts saying "No, Daddy" as her last words, and then shortly after that it's "Daddy, no." And so that, when you have that, I'm not completely familiar with all the content of Dr. Phil, but maybe some people are, and my question would be, has he ever brought this up? Has he ever brought up the fact that there's this inconsistency, this incongruity between the statements Watts is saying that Bella made, right? And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see that. I don't think it takes like someone who's kind of a absolute expert of the case just to notice that you have on this crucial aspect, Bella's final words, and in that version you kind of have a imaginative sketch of what it was like from Bella's point of view, this whole horrible tragedy. You're sort of getting the actual words and the emotions and the tone and the fear and the whole dynamic that was playing out and the horror of it. And yet in this vital area you have the words not actually lining up. Is it "No, Daddy" or "Daddy, no"? You might say it doesn't really matter. Does it matter if you switch them around? It's kind of saying the same thing. "Daddy, please don't do this. Please don't do this, Daddy." I mean, isn't it the same thing? No, it's not. And human memory is in some ways fallible, but in other ways it is kind of photographic or very grainy in terms of reality. So sometimes our memories on certain hinging memories are crystal clear even years and years later. We can sometimes remember things through music or smells. Whether we really intelligent or not, the memory, human memory, kind of has a way of attaching itself to certain triggers, like words, like sometimes colors, as I say. And so in something as significant as someone's last words, it's very unlikely that you're going to get them wrong. You can think for yourself, the first time you met your soulmate, you can often remember that like it was yesterday. There are some memories we carry with us that are crystal clear. And I can guarantee you, in a true crime scenario, the memories of these milestone events, where you've ended somebody's life, you're going to remember that with crystal clarity as well. And there's a problem that Watts doesn't seem to remember it very clearly. It's just two words. And I made another video a few days ago about Watts's IQ being 135 or 140, and is he a genius, and discussing his memory. He's supposedly got a really good memory. He's called Rain Man, right? So if he's got such a good memory, why can't he remember the simple order of two words? And I could take it further than that, but I'm going to just accept that you're already on board, and then just take it a little bit further. Part of the aspect that isn't being dealt with, I think, by a lot of people discussing the case, is everyone's sort of getting caught up with the sort of first layer of things. People are sort of jumping from one flower to the next, saying, could it be this, could it be that? And because of this failure to come up with a version of our own, you don't graduate to the next level where you say, well, where does this take us? So, for example, if we say that there is serious incongruity in the semantics, which is I guess a complicated way of saying there is something wrong with Bella's last words. So if we say, okay, I'm not sure if I agree with it, but let's just go along with it, where does that take us, right? If there is maybe something there, so what? Also, the question is, why didn't the FBI, CBI, or the media pick up on this inconsistency? So in the discovery, nowhere do you get the FBI, the CBI, any of the interrogators sort of mentioning in a separate way, wow, there's a inconsistency here. So it doesn't come up there. You don't have the interrogators when they're actually talking to Watts saying, can you hold up, can you just be clear, what is going on here, what did she actually say? And the interesting thing is, in the interrogation, and we will listen to a few versions of it through the course of this episode, but in the interrogation, the word exactly comes up quite a few times, not only from Coda but from Watts as well, where he says, that's exactly what she said, is that exactly what she said, etc., etc. And so if you take the letter of the law in terms of that, and you say, well, if that's exactly what was said, then interchanging, swapping around no daddy with daddy no, it's not exactly the same, right? So in a way, one can sort of let the FBI and CBI off the hook and say, well, maybe you've got reasons to hold a few cards to your chest. Maybe you're not going to reveal all your thoughts to the public or whatever it may be. But the media didn't even pick up on this inconsistency. So, I mean, what you literally have is some media, like the Daily Beast, quoting Watts in terms of the confession, in terms of the actual audio, like quoting what he's saying and saying no daddy, and I think it's repeated a couple of times. Then you have another media like People magazine saying daddy no. And so you have these separate sort of media organizations doing their separate analysis, and some of them giving the one version of it and the other one giving the other. And this is the part that's crazy, is, are you telling me that no journalist noticed that there's this inconsistency? If that's true, then it kind of shows a media that is incredibly sort of suffering from attention deficit disorder. But there could also be another explanation, which is, as soon as you open this can of worms, and that's exactly what it is. As soon as you open the can of worms and say, and you acknowledge that there is an inconsistency, what's happening? Well, what is happening is you're saying, this second confession, which is supposed to draw a line under the Watts case and say, we've reached the finish line, this is the end. As soon as you say, but there's an inconsistency here, there's doubt here, there's a problem here, then that line that you've drawn under the case suddenly kind of becomes a dotted line, and it risks fizzling into sort of kind of a sandcastle at the edge of a the tidal line on a beach. It's going to get washed away, and you're going to be left with, okay, well, it's not over, we need to get clarity on this. And that isn't what the agenda is in this case. In this case, the agenda is to shut the case down, close the case, close the file, put it away, and it's over. Seems to be the agenda from law enforcement. I'm not saying it's coming from them, but it's being imposed on them, and so it is how they're approaching it. And then there's also seems to be the media taking their cue from that agenda and saying, well, we're not going to take this any further. One could argue that this is sort of common sense. Chris Watts has been found guilty, move on. But it's, if you compare to other high-profile cases like John Benet Ramsey, the John Benet Ramsey case is still being discussed today, even though the district attorney then shut the case down. I mean, we know that for a fact. So you kind of had the district attorney shutting the case down, and it nevertheless has still sort of cycled through the media. In this case, you've got the case shut down, but it's also seems to be shut down by the media, which is quite interesting. Obviously, in reality, the case isn't shut down, just in terms of the millions of people discussing it on social media and commenting all over the place, and that whole sort of circus. It's still very much on people's minds, and it's still very active, and it's still high profile in terms of how can I put it, social media interest, if not the mainstream media interest. And this brings up a second point, which is, besides the serious incongruity in the semantics, there's the strange intertextuality versus circular reasoning. And again, it sounds like quite a complicated concept, but it's basically a situation where you have you're starting to see the impact of commentary more from the public than from anyone else, more from like YouTubers than anyone else. You having kind of a situation where that sort of cloud is having kind of a reverse impact on the narrative itself. It's almost like a mirror reflecting on a mirror, if I can put it that way, and that it starts to, in a weird way, it starts to reshape the original story. I'm not saying in a true way, but it's nevertheless having an impact. And what I mean is, and I'll provide a clip for this as well. Watts is using the video of the shadows on the driveway to prove the children were still alive. And by video, I'm not talking about the CCTV or it's not really CCTV, it's the Trinastich motion detector video, under the ceiling of his porch. He's not referring to that, because there's nowhere in that video that if just seen on its own terms, where that shows that the children were alive or anything like that. That wasn't the case from the district attorney, where the district attorney literally said during the sentencing, he said Watts went back in the house 3 times, once for each body. And so he was literally implying that there was footage of Watts, almost as though they were being seen, but carrying, the deceased victims one by one into the truck. And that's not the case. You don't actually see that. They're not 3 separate trips into the garage. That's also an interesting thing to discuss, is stating that as a fact at the sentencing, when it's not going to be counted, it's not going to be defended against, and so it gets to stand. And then unexpectedly you have this situation with a second confession, and now suddenly that whole narrative is different. Now suddenly it's the children were running around. And where did that idea come from? Is it what's telling the truth and then he's using the video as kind of backup? Or is the video influencing Watts to come up with a new version, which we know he's been doing all along? Has Watts been led to say that because of the conjecture on social media? And don't forget, people are inclined to imagine Watts in sort of a prison cell, and he sort of just sits there, and maybe some information leaks out, and maybe he writes letters and so on. But there's actually there's an interchange, there's an exchange of information. Watts often phones his family, and they will comment on certain things that are uppermost in their mind, things that are being said, speculation, and they will want clarity. But what this does is it feeds Watts's what do you call it? It feeds his sort of case file on what the world knows about him, and there's some stuff he can use to his own advantage, and this is one of them, right? So it's important to bear in mind that the second confession, when it happened in February, on February 18, 2019, right? If you go and search YouTube and all the armchair detectives speculating about the shadows, you will see that the first video came out about the shadows on January the 18th, and then there's another one on January the 25th, and again on March 6th, right? I see there's another one on January 14th, another one on January the 10th. There's speculation on Reddit on January 11th, right? Now think about that. The height of the speculation about the shadows came on sort of mid-January, right? When did the second confession take place? Basically 1 month later, almost exactly a month later. So if you think about it, if Watts had been informed about all the speculation, and I think that odds are extremely good that he was. If you just think about it, isn't his mother, who wants to believe that Shan'ann committed the crimes, going to want to know what's that all about? And so you have a situation now where Watts can kind of use this to his advantage, that sort of minimizes what he did and how he did it. That he wasn't sure about what he was going to do to his children, or something like that. But the point is, you're kind of having speculation on social media impacting on a version. Like I say, all of this came out in mid-January, and one could even take it further and say this speculation may have prompted the FBI to go back to Watts, and this is really the area they wanted to get into. In other words, although they asked him lots of questions, this was really the thing they wanted to get certainty on, which is, we don't know what happened to the children. Can you tell us that? And he didn't really want to, if you remember that. Okay, and so
it's hard to see. Okay. And I believe you. I'm trying to make sure that I'm giving you all the opportunities to be comfortable enough to tell me exactly. Okay.
They were like,
Okay.
trust me, I hear that every day when fellows talking to me at the site.
Oh, really? What do you mean?
When she said, "Daddy, no." She said, "What happened to CC?" where she asked if the same thing, the exact same thing that happened to me as CC.
Did she ask you that? Okay. So Bella's pretty smart. How did she sound when she asked you that, Chris?
She had that soft voice she always had.
Yeah. And what exactly did she say?
She said exactly the same thing that happened to me as CC. And then I said, I don't even remember what I said.
Okay.
I don't know if I just said yes, like a horrible person, or if I just put that blanket over her too and did the same thing.
Same blanket, same way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She said, no, Daddy. And that's the last thing she said.
Did she say no, Daddy, like, please, no, Daddy type thing? Did she say saying, don't do it?
She said, no, Daddy.
Okay.
So when we listen to it, you see that there's this circular reasoning where Watts uses the video to prove the children were still alive. It doesn't prove that. It may suggest that. It certainly doesn't prove it. But then the video also supposedly corroborates what he says, which is how a lot of people have been reasoning this case. It's like he said that and the video proves it. It doesn't. There's the suggestion of it, certainly. And so he brings it up as supporting evidence. It's not supporting evidence, it's support. That's all it is. Interestingly, the agent, when questioned on this, in other words, where Watt says to him, didn't you see the video? Then the agent kind of demurs and he sort of says, well, it's hard to see. And that's true. It is hard to see exactly what is going on, and that's why they're sort of asking Watts for clarity, and then Watts sketches this sort of technicolor spiel, right, of all sorts of things going on. But reading between the lines, the agent doesn't sound convinced, and Watts himself doesn't sound very sure. He sort of says a few words and then he says a few other words. And just like the first confession, Coda gets this confession by leading Watts through it. He sort of will say, was Bella first or was Cece first? And then Watts will sort of say yes. There are a couple of times he asks a question Watts doesn't even answer. And so that's really important to bear in mind, is this version is once again the agents leading Watts to an area that they've sort of in a way already made up their minds about or they want to deal with, right? And this brings us to the third level, which is, I guess, the most important level, which is, how do we interpret this data? And no one seems to be doing that, which is strange. The true crime rocket science interrogation is basically the question of what happens when we interrogate the cloud of semantics and this whole almost ecosystem of things working. The social media having an impact on Watts, and it also having an impact on the FBI, and the FBI going there to get a version, and then Watts giving them a version that's influenced by what he knows, the public knows. So, given the extensive case file that we know, where does it take us? What does interpreting the data show us? In other words, not what Chris Watts says, but what can we see that is being hidden? In other words, what can we bring to this case that takes it forward? And so this is the interpretation from True Crime Rocket Science. This is the interpretation. There's a psychological mirror in Nutgate to this whole scenario. So when what sounds emotional about Bella saying, is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? This sounds suspiciously like the situation that Bella was faced with following Nutgate. And again, you know, people speculate and project and so on, but they don't think about what would it be like to be Bella in this situation. What would it be like? What would it be like to be this little girl in her family, given all the sort of gyrations and the arguing that was going on? You know, what was it like on the ground to be this little girl sort of running around these people? You know, at home and in North Carolina. You know, what was her experience of it? What was Cece's experience of it? What was it like to be the children, given what was going on with the adults? And so this notion where Bella is while she's alive, I'm talking about long before this weekend. When I say long before, I'm talking about going back to Nutgate on July 9th. This question of, is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? That's where the question arises at Nutgate. It's something Bella repeatedly said, but not at the well site, and not about smothering. It's about Bella dying in her sleep, or dying because of an allergic reaction. And you must bear in mind, these were both sickly children. This is something Watts has said, but you can even just go into the social media and just see all the images of the children in hospital, with their masks on and their various treatments. You can see that. And then there's also the claim that the many visits to the hospital caused the debt burden, the sort of, it was a big part of the debt burden. In fact, in another video that I posted, when Watts is asked, you know, what was the reason you guys were in such financial difficulty? His first response is because of the children. You know, it's just a natural consequence of bringing up the children. I wouldn't say completely natural, because they were more sickly than normal. And one would almost anticipate this if Shan'ann had lupus, that the children would sort of inherit, let's say, a compromised immune system. I don't want to go into that too much more than that, but one aspect one can acknowledge is the fact that Shan'ann herself, through Nutgate, is kind of acknowledging the particularly vulnerable condition of her child. In other words, the fact that Shan'ann reacts in the way that she does, she's acknowledging that Cece's life is sort of precariously, how can I put it? She's just, her life is fragile in the sense that it could easily be snuffed out because of things like allergies and other things. And so, you know, if we accept that as true, we accept that Shan'ann's response there is justified, then we must also accept that the children's health was poorer than average. And if that's the case, then the children themselves would know that. Cece would know, you know, I'm not a healthy child. I must be careful about this. I must be careful about that. Bella, who's older, would also know that. She'd also know, wow, we get sick often. We need to take medication. Our mother takes medication. You know, this is part of our lives, is being sick and going to hospital and all that kind of thing. So besides the fact that they were sickly children, and Shan'ann's meltdown over Nutgate didn't happen over a single day. So Nutgate wasn't just July the 9th. Nutgate was basically in play from July 9th until basically the murders. I mean, Nutgate basically was an explosion that sort of went on and on and on over several weeks. And at the same time, we can say that Gate was the same thing. Gate just a few days later was a explosion of anxiety and uncertainty from Kissinger, where she was wondering whether she's going to be first, kind of thing. And that also lasted over a period of time. It's not just a single detonation, it's kind of a slow burn, and it's also a sort of an ongoing storm, right? We also know that Nutgate was still in play, and it was still a present problem on July 17th, which was Cece's birthday, where, just like the wedding, the Watts parents sort of boycotted it. The Chris Watts' parents didn't show up to Cece's birthday party, and so the reason for that was because of Nutgate, because of this big in fact, the Daily Beast at one point quotes Watts talking about a knockdown, drag-out fight between Shan'ann and Cindy Watts during that summer in 2018. A knockdown, drag-out fight. It's quite an interesting term there. It's quite a physical sounding description of a...
And what exactly did she say?
She said that it's the same thing that happened to me as CC. And then I said, I don't even remember what I said.
Okay.
I don't know if I just said yes, like a horrible person, or if I just put that blanket over her too and did the same thing.
So, yeah, the point to make is the fact that this Nutgate wasn't a flash in the pan. It didn't happen over a single day. That it went over, it was boiling over when Watts was in North Carolina in August. So by then it was three weeks in the making. It was still happening when he wanted to go and see his parents, which was towards the end of that week, which was August 6th. As far as I know, I think Cadle refers to it as being August 5th, but I think it was August 6th, because August 7th was when they flew back to Colorado, and certainly the phone data review seems to show it as August 6th, but in any event, most crucial of all, we know from the babysitter McKenna Lindstrom that as late as August 11th, the last day and night of her life, Bella expressed a concern about Cece. She said she was worried that if she went to sleep, when she woke up, Cece might not wake up. And this concern for Cece naturally affected Bella herself, which brings us to this whole sentence: is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? Bear in mind, it's not Cece saying this about Bella, it's Bella saying it about Cece. Right? Cece was the one at the center of Nutgate. And so you have the older child wondering, could the same thing happen to me as Cece? And think about the repercussions. You know, if there's anything that's happening with this little girl at the center of this storm, it is she's looking at something that happened. She was a witness, and then the family kind of gets blown to smithereens by this situation. You know, it's where her mother is sort of convincing her that her grandmother could have killed her sister, kind of thing. And what does that do? It creates not just anxiety for her sibling, but for herself. It's like, wow, I think am I going to be okay? Am I in danger? And the weird thing is that that monologue, that sort of inner monologue or inner dialogue, was actually portentous, and it was kind of ominously true, and ominously gonna come true. But the interesting thing is the fact that Watts is aware of it. So in the scenario of where he's killing his own children, he's saying that this is what Bella was saying. And I think it's true, but it's not true in terms of at the last moment of her life. It's more true in the last days of her life, because we know it was true. So there's, and that's where we must come to the criminal psychology aspect. Just as the disposal of the children's bodies was duplicated, one little body in one tank, another in another tank, it's also very likely that the way they were killed was the same. The way they were killed was also duplicated. And it's for this reason that the irony rings in Watts's mind of his own child asking, is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? Because in a premeditated scenario, when Bella asked these words, Watts in his mind knew what he was going to do, and he knew the answer was yes. And it's for this reason when Coda asked him what he answered, when Bella asked what's going to happen to me, Watts claims he can't remember. It's quite a simple question. Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? Well, how are you going to answer? You can either say yes or no. You can say don't worry or something, but notice the words he uses. I don't remember if I said yes like a horrible person. Now if you take that into the mechanics of the premeditation, the mechanics of this crime, the machine of the premeditation, you've got someone who's sort of silently and slyly sitting with his family around him, and maybe he's on his phone talking to his mistress, but meanwhile in the back of his mind he's thinking, when one of his children is saying, worried about her safety, and she's saying, could the same thing happen to me? Shan'ann may be answering her, Cece may be saying something, there might be chat in the background, but meanwhile Watts is thinking about that. He's thinking about those words. Could the same thing happen to me, that's Bella, as Cece? And he's thinking, what could that thing be? What should he do? What is his plan, right? And so that is the chilling aspect, and that is when you take this psychology and you start to put it together like pieces of a puzzle. And this is where it brings us when we start to ask the question, the fact that these vital words, last words, are inconsistent. What does it mean? What could it mean? And this is where it takes us. Doesn't it feel authentic? Doesn't it sort of resonate with Chris Watts as we know him now? Doesn't it resonate with Bella and what we know was happening in the situation with the family? Doesn't it also resonate with Cece? Doesn't it resonate with the whole dynamics that we're so familiar with? So, if you take Watts' words, we can't remember what he says when Bella says, Daddy, are you going to do to me, or whatever it is, could the same thing happen to me as Cece? He says, I don't remember if I said yes, like a horrible person. Because a horrible person, it would take an especially horrible person to say that in his mind, meanwhile pretending that everything was going to be okay when it wasn't. Let me just repeat that. If Watts is either being asked directly by his own daughter, is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece? And bear in mind, he had custody over his children on the very last 2, arguably 3 days of their life. It was the whole of Friday, the whole of Saturday, but then excluding the night when he went out, and then the whole of Sunday, because he put them to bed as well. So he had 3 full days with them. Are you telling me in that time that that Bella didn't ever raise this concern when she raised it with a babysitter on Saturday night? Obviously she did raise it, and so the question is, what was he thinking and how did he answer it. Meanwhile, it would take an especially horrible person to say that in his mind. That yes, the same thing is going to happen to you, and it's a terrible thing to say that in his mind. Meanwhile, pretending that everything's going to be okay. Meanwhile, giving his daughters dinner. Meanwhile, giving them cold pizza. Meanwhile, taking them to a birthday party, and all the while thinking, yes, the same thing is going to happen to you. Right? It's chilling. And hence, if you take this whole thing of pretending that everything was going to be okay, I'm talking about in the scenario of his own family, in the scenario of this crime, this whole psychology of pretending that everything's going to be okay when it's not. You can even take that further. The whole Thrive thing was like that as well. The whole situation to their debt, the whole affair with Nicole Kessinger, was pretending that everything is okay when it's not. From there you get the scenario of him sketching, taking the kids alive to the well site. It's the same sly scheming as the premeditated murder itself. It's subtly allowing people to believe what they want to believe. Meanwhile, in the background, the silver fox is smiling, a cunning smile in his heart of hearts. You may say he's a bad liar, but he's fooled the media and he's fooled most of the armchair detectives who consider themselves experts by now on what really, in inverted commas, happened. In the next episode, I'll be dealing with first my response to the original Dr. Phil show, dealing with Bella's last words, and as well as what I stated then in early March was the original theory of true crime rocket science. This analysis is explicated in rigorous detail in the 7th book in the TWO FACE series, Annihilation. Thank you for listening. If you're finding value and insight and just interesting new ideas that perhaps you haven't heard before, or that are making you think about the case in a way that you haven't before, please subscribe to the channel. Please share the video amongst your networks, and hit the bell, hit the like, leave a comment, and it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts, and also interesting to hear if your thoughts are evolving, if they are changing, and if you are.
Okay. So did they tell you anything that was happening? Was there anything that was concerning that you heard?
Bella she sat by me and she was really concerned. Her little sister fell asleep before her, so she sat on the couch with me for a while, and she actually told me something. She's like, "Can I ask you something?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "My little sister has, she told me if she eats coconut, she'll never be able to see her again." So I'm guessing that the littlest one has a severe allergy, and that's what they told her, that if she eats that, she'll never be able to see her again. And she was really upset by that.
Bella was?
Yeah.
And so if Cece ate coconut, she would potentially die?
I know she has a tree nut allergy, but I never heard coconut. So I wonder if they just, I don't know if she got coconut.
So Cece has a tree nut allergy?
Yeah, like a severe one.
Okay. So you watch the children. He leaves you get there at 4:30? What time do you think he leaves?
Probably 4:45 after we've gone through everything, and he orders the pizza for us.
Where was the pizza from?
But understand that at this point, I still can't answer questions about the facts surrounding the investigation.
Really all everyone wanted throughout was justice for Shan'ann and Bella and Celeste. We're certainly pleased this seems to be the outcome.
I think all of those who were involved never truly believed that he would give us an accurate statement. What I can tell you most affirmatively today by what happened in court is the spotlight that he tried to shine on Shan'ann falsely, incorrectly, and frankly a flat-out lie is the spotlight that he tried to shine on Shan'ann falsely, doing it the right way. Frankly, it's flat out lie. I could do it. I didn't know what else to do.
And he's so disgusting. I'm so ashamed of him. Why? Oh, why? How? I don't even understand how you could bring yourself to do that to somebody who's like that.
It was a shocking deal news of the week. Occidental increasing its bid for Anadarko to $76 a share.